Hello and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if this is your first time here. My name is Oliver, I'm a vintage compact collector and enthusiast, and today I would love to tell you all about these gorgeous Raquel leather book compacts that I believe I have narrowed down to within a 5-year date range of when they were produced. They just look like little tiny books. I gotta do like the 2016 beauty YouTuber thing. I am a beauty YouTuber, not like that. This is beauty YouTube, anyway. Now, before we get into this, I would like to apologize for the 7-month delay between my last video and this video. I know I said that I didn't have a schedule planned, but by no stretch of the imagination could I have ever fathomed it taking me 7 months to get my second video out, and that should not happen again. I don't want to make excuses, but there were a lot of extenuating circumstances this year, from a good friend of mine passing away right after I put out my first video, to a drawn-out family situation that lasted for several months, to just 2 weeks ago, when I was already working on this video and planned on having it published, my cat needed emergency surgery and needed 24/7 monitoring. God forbid it ever takes me 7 months to get another video out. That should not have happened. This has been an absolutely unbelievable year, and I'm really sorry for the wait. The hope from now on is no more than 6 weeks should go between videos. I'm hoping to have a video out every 4 to 6 weeks. I also apologize if you were looking forward to hearing about a Richard Headnut compact. I discussed that at the end of my last video, but I'm still trying to get my footing and figure out exactly how I want to do things here. And I have several Richard Headnut compacts from different time periods, and I really like putting as much information in these videos as possible. I find it really fascinating to learn about these companies and try to figure out everything that I can about when these compacts came from and where they came from. And so doing Richard Headnut, I don't want to make one video that has all of this information and then the other videos are just like, isn't that pretty? I have nothing to say about this. You know what I mean? And so the goal is for brands like that I have multiple compacts of, to make a series of videos that you can watch in order, and then everything will all come together at the end beautifully, but that's going to take a little bit more time. So we're talking about the Raquel compacts today because they had a limited range of cosmetics that they made, and these are the only compacts that I'm interested in from the company, to be honest with you. So I thought that these would be a really fun standalone video. I really love these compacts, and I found a lot of information about them. So of course, first, let's do a tour of these compacts so you can see what we're talking about, and you can see the beautiful details in them and exactly what they look like on the inside. The details are really, really important a lot of the time in finding dating information, and so I would love for you to be able to see the differences in these compacts to know exactly what we're talking about. I have 2 of these compacts in black leather and 1 in red leather, and if you look closely, you can see that all 3 of them actually have different markings on the leather themselves. One of them is plain, one of them has these really small little circles, and then one of them has kind of a hatching pattern. I don't know if that's what you would call it, but that's what it looks like to me. The fronts of these compacts all have the exact same gold embossed design, which I think is absolutely beautiful, and then the spines all say Raquel. Now, interestingly, when I bought the first one of these compacts, the person selling it thought that it had been personalized for somebody named Raquel. They didn't realize that that was a company. And the first place I always go when researching is my compact books. And so after buying it, I was just flipping through all the pages, seeing if I could find a picture that looked anything like it. And I was shocked when I found the exact compact and found several other designs in the same style by the same brand, and realized that Raquel was the brand, not a personalization. I was so excited. I immediately tried to find more. I now have 3, and I would love to eventually collect more designs, all of them if possible, and just have like a little bookshelf of all my little Raquel leather books. I think that would be so cute. All of the cases open with this little latch on the side that pops the book open, and the inside would have held rouge and powder. One of my cases still has the powder and rouge intact. One of them has some remnants and was clearly very well used, and then one of them has been gutted. You may have already noticed a few differences about the interiors of these cases. The gutted black case and the red case both have the same style mirror, and the red case has these little loops on the puffs that would have made them easier to pull out so that you're not scratching your makeup as you're trying to grab your puff. The other case has a rectangular mirror, and the puffs don't have those loops, but you can see on the rouge the remnants of what looks like used to be just a piece of ribbon or something that helped pull those out, but it looks like it was cut off. When I first found these, I thought that the differences in design might help me pinpoint different dates that they were manufactured, and I'm happy to say that I was right about that, and I have these cases narrowed down to different years that I believe that they were produced. Overall, I think these cases are absolutely gorgeous. They're some of my favorites in my collection, although to be fair, I will probably say that about every compact that I own, and I'm really, really excited to share them with you. So like I said, the first place I always look when I'm starting my research is in my vintage compact books, and I will have those all listed in the description below if you would like to check them out for yourself if you're interested in getting into vintage compacts, or just if you would like to look through them, because there are really some beautiful designs in there. In powder compacts, a collector collector's guide, there is a little blurb about a 1950s book style compact created by Cody, and it mentions the Raquel compact as a style that was available as early as the late 1920s. In Vintage Ladies Compacts Identification and Value Guide, we can see a September 1927 advertisement from Toilet Requisites that shows the same Raquel compact that I have, as well as several other styles designed by the company. And the article specifies that it came in 3 different colors, which are black calf, red Morocco, and green Morocco. The ad says that even the hard-boiled get a thrill, and from what I've been able to gather, hard-boiled was essentially slang for somebody who was really tough and didn't show a lot of emotions, and I think that that's hilarious. The ad also mentions that it came in one of Raquel's 3 signature scents, and I'm going to butcher the name of one of these every time I say it. I'm so sorry. I do not speak French. It sounds French, and I could not find any indication of how this is supposed to be pronounced. So the fragrances that it came in were Orange Blossom, Landley, I'm putting it on the screen here. I don't know how to pronounce that, and I'm very sorry about it. And then Olor de la Noche, which is Fragrance of the Night. Then, in Compacts, Carryalls, and Face Powder Boxes, Identification and Values, Volume 2, say that 10 times fast, there's a 1928 Harper's Bazaar advertisement for these Raquel books, and it says that they come in 3 choice leathers and 11 colors to choose from. This ad also mentions that Raquel has created the 3 perfumes that were mentioned in the 1927 advertisement, but it doesn't specify that the compacts come in those scents, so it's possible that by 1928, they had stopped scenting the compacts for one reason or another. I find it really interesting that they went from 3 colors to 11 in just a year's time, which really shows how popular these compacts are. And again, in this picture, you can see 4 total varieties of the compacts, including the one that I have. The ad also mentions that these compacts were easily gutted for visiting card use, which I wonder if that's what happened to one of mine. And apparently a visiting card is very similar to a calling card, and people would use it to announce themselves when visiting somebody, to leave if they tried to stop by and somebody wasn't home, to console somebody over an illness, and all kinds of other things. But something that I found interesting is that there's actually a lot of etiquette to them that I never would have thought of before, regarding sizing and typeface and ink color and even like folding down different corners to mean different things. This was a whole language in and of itself, which I never knew before. These 3 small mentions were the only ones I could find in my books. Several of my books do not mention Raquel whatsoever, which I found really interesting because a lot of the time there's a high level of crossover when I'm researching something. So I began looking for advertisements online, and the only one I could find was one from Vogue about the Orange Blossom perfume. It wasn't even about the compact itself. I began trying to find information about when Raquel was established, and I found a few small mentions of it that didn't really have a lot of solid information. On the Perfume Intelligence website, it lists 10 perfumes created by Raquel between 1925 and 1935. Pause. I don't know how I overlooked this, but this has Olor de la Noche listed 3 different times and Orange Blossom listed twice, all under different dates. I have no idea what this website is doing. And it says that it was established by Graeff Miller in New York in 1924. All the advertisements that we've seen have listed a 5th Avenue, New York address for the company, so that was a really good starting point. I was later able to find out that the Perfume Intelligence website had the manufacturing date for several of these perfumes wrong, including Orange Blossom, which they said came from 1927, and we'll soon see that's not true. And they gave no reference for how they know that Graeff Miller established the company. I don't know where that information came from, but it was very helpful to at least be able to get his name. So if you're going to do your own research and things like this, be very wary about the sites. They can have information wrong, but that doesn't mean that everything that they have is not helpful. Searching for Graeff Miller's name didn't yield a whole lot of results, but one thing that did come up was an entry from 2014 on a blog called Cleopatra's Boudoir that was largely talking about Raquel's perfumes, but this blog also says that the company was established by Graeff Miller in 1924. It also says that they started advertising in 1926 and that they were purchased by Barclay & Company in 1927, and that Raquel continued to produce perfumes while Barclay & Company made soaps and other exports. There's no mention of who was creating makeup after the acquisition, but it does say that the company was either moved or able to expand to a second location at 251 West 19th Street in New York. It also says that the Orange Blossom perfume was created in 1920, not 1927 as the Perfume Intelligence website stated, and that is a very big difference that will become very important in being able to date these compacts later. I did reach out to Cleopatra's Boudoir to try to see where they were able to find the information about Graeff Miller establishing the company came from, but sadly I never heard back from them. They do still post though, and their blog is very interesting, so you can absolutely check that out. After this, I started looking at Etsy and eBay listings to see if anybody else had these compacts or perfumes from the same company, and see if there were pictures of the packaging or anything that I could glean any information from. I was able to find a 1925 bottle of Allure de la la Noche, but the blurb about the company was literally copied word for word from Cleopatra's Boudoir. In addition to this Etsy listing, I was able to find a Pinterest post about an Etsy listing that is no longer standing that has pictures of a Raquel vanity case that's distinctly different than mine on the inside. It still has the rectangular mirror, but the powder and the rouge are in opposite places, and there's actually a metal powder cover over the powder. Now, companies had started adding these a little bit later on because they realized that not only is it annoying to have powder like go everywhere when you open your compact and it gets all over the mirror, but it was actually doing damage to the metal insides of the compacts. So I believe that this has to have come from after mine were created, because it would be really weird for them to go backwards on that design. The other interesting thing about this is that it says patent pending US and foreign on that metal cover. The foreign is FOR''N. I'm assuming that means foreign. I don't know what else that would mean, but I've also never seen that before, so I could be wrong. There's also an eBay listing for one of these book compacts with the same kind of fancier mirror than mine have, but interestingly, this one says patent pending on the site, or pat penned specifically, which you've already seen that none of mine say. Additionally, there was another Etsy listing that actually had the original box and the refill information, which I've never seen before, so I got a thrill out of that. And the back of this one has Philadelphia embossed on it. Now, I wasn't able to find any information about this specifically. It doesn't seem that it was made like that by the company. It's entirely possible that this one was personalized for somebody, or that it was bought by a company in Philadelphia and sold as souvenirs, which is something that happened very often with compacts. This listing does also specify that this particular case was perfumed with the L'Oreal perfume. I'm so sorry I'm butchering that. I would like to note that none of my compacts have any kind of perfume smell to them. They just smell like old makeup, but it's entirely possible that after nearly 100 years that they just don't have that smell anymore. There were a few other listings that I found that weren't particularly helpful, but the next point of interest was a blog called Mandicrafts, or Mandicrafts, and it says that this case was designed by a company called Zell. Now, Zell, or Zell Fifth Avenue, was a very, very well-known compact brand that really hit their stride in the 60s, and that was like the height of their popularity, but it seems that they started sometime in the 1920s, and that was very helpful information. By searching for Zell, I found a few other listings for these compacts that had patent pending printed on the side, and one of those blurbs mentioned that the Zell company was founded by David H. Zell, that his wife Sophie was the president of the company, and that his son Daniel D. Zell also worked for the company and had several patents under his name. And this is where things really started picking up. I immediately began looking for Zell patents, and the only thing I could find from Daniel Zell was from 2008, which was very, very irrelevant to what we're looking for, but I did find several things created by a man named William Tamoschat who attributed them to David Zell, and I found several patents by David Zell himself. Now, one of the patents David Zell filed on November 15th, 1928 and published on April 9th, 1929 looks like a Raquel design. You can see the little embossed R in the corner, and you can also see that two of the edges of the design are rounded just like the Raquel books. Quick interjection, I just noticed while editing this that little R in the corner is in the 1928 Harper's Bazaar advertisement that I showed you before. So that is a Raquel design, that's not just conjecture. There's also a patent from January 27th, 1928 that was published on May 21st, 1929 that shows that David designed the actual Raquel bookcase itself, not just the cover designs. In yet another patent by David Zell, you can actually see the interior mechanism of the case, and you can see that they've drawn the exact same fancy little mirror that two of my cases have. This is all very compelling evidence that David Zell was the inventor of these cases, and that 1928 to mid-1929 would have likely been around the time that patent pending would have been stamped on them. Now, this isn't relevant to the compact itself, but I found it interesting that David Zell was sued for patent infringement by a company called Bankers Utility Company. He designed coin banks, and he had designed a book-style coin bank that they said was a patent infringement. And it came before the court at least 5 times, with them each going back and forth, suing each other and yelling at each other and responding to each other, and I wasn't able to find whatever happened there and what the resolution was, but I found that interesting. After looking up David Zell, I looked up to see if Graeff Miller had any patents, and you can see that he actually had several patents for perfume bottles, including one that you can see in old advertisements for Olor de la Noche and Orange Blossom, which is our first solid connection that Graeff Miller did work in some capacity for the Raquel company. While all of this was interesting, that is 100% of the information that I was able to find for free. If I had been left with free resources, this would have been an incredibly short video with a lot of open-ended who even knows what happened here. But fortunately, I was able to get a subscription to the newspapers.com website, which has like an archive going over a century of newspapers all across America. And I found literally hundreds of advertisements for Raquel that helped me narrow this down, as well as several articles that gave us more information about some of the people working for Raquel. So let's get into that. The first mention of anything related to Raquel whatsoever was from June 4th, 1921, where a clipping mentions that a leather goods and novelties company by David H. Zell had had been incorporated, and this seems to be the Zell company that would have created these cases. On January 26, 1925, in the Riverside Daily Press, it mentions that Raquel has been incorporated, and it explains that Raquel is involved in the manufacturing of toilet articles, such as perfume and toilet water, which sounds really gross, but that's just a less intense version of perfume that's mixed with water and alcohol. The next year, between January and November of 1926, we see several mentions of a man named Paul Donald St. John. He's mentioned first as part of a wedding announcement in January of 1926, and it says that he used to own the Orange Blossom perfume shop in Riverside, California, and that now he is engaged in the manufacture of perfumes in New York, specializing in flower perfumes made from California-grown flowers. It says that the firm is Raquel Incorporated and that it will soon be presented in all large cities of the United States. It also mentions that a recent display of his flower perfumes in the avenue windows of the Franklin Simon Company was accredited as the largest window display of perfumes ever made in Manhattan. The Franklin Simon Company isn't necessarily relevant, other than that it was a specialty house that had been around for about 30 years already and was very well known, beloved, had multiple addresses in New York, and so for Orange Blossom to make it into that display was a very big deal. In November of 1926, it says that Paul Donald St. John has moved to New York and is working for the firm of Raquel, and it mentions that the headquarters is on Fifth Avenue. So we know that by November of 1926, Raquel was in its place in New York. It has been so hard to find any information about the people who actually worked for Raquel that it was really interesting to not only find this information, but find that he was definitely the originator of the Orange Blossom perfume. There's still no evidence that it was started as early as 1920, and I couldn't find any information about the old Orange Blossom perfume shop, but for it to have been successful and been able to then fold into Raquel in some way, it definitely could have been around for several years already. Going back to April 17th, 1926, the Morning Call from Allentown, Pennsylvania mentions that a Graeff Miller of Ridgewood, New Jersey has received a patent for a bottle or similar article. If we go back and look at the patents that we found for Graeff Miller, the first was filed on June 4th, 1925, and again looks to be this photo of Allure de la Noche that we found on Etsy. And the second was filed on December 11th, 1925, and published on April 20th, 1926, just 3 days after this article. And we can also see that Graeff Miller was from Ridgewood, New Jersey. The article said that the patent attorney reported these, and so I'm guessing that they got information about which patents were about to be published before they were actually published, since the actual patent publication date is 3 days after this article. Now, on that same date, April 20th, 1926, we get to see in the Orlando Sentinel the first advertisement for Raquel's Orange Blossom perfume by name. The article also says that Raquel sells toilet water, bath salts, and body talcum, and from here on out, we start to see more and more Raquel advertisements. On May 5th, 1926, there's a Vogue advertisement for Orange Blossom, and on May 19th, 1926, we can see the first face powder ad for the company, although it does mention that it's in a new size, so it seems that they've been making this for a while, and this is just the first advertisement I could find. All of this seems to fall in line with the assertion that Raquel only began advertising in 1926. Now, in the same ad, they also mentioned their new fragrance, Allure de la Noche, and their list of offerings is much larger than what we saw just a month ago. Between mid-1926 and mid-1927, we start to see more and more articles for Raquel's various offerings, showing that this company was very successful, and I even found an article about an R.G. Pascoe, who is the Pacific Coast manager of the company, as well as a picture of him and an article mentioning him representing Raquel at a druggist show. On August 18th, 1927, an advertisement that includes a face powder coupon for Raquel mentions their third famous perfume, L'Onlay, and seems to be the first time they advertised it. And after building all of this history and seeing all of these ads, finally, on September 23rd and 24th, 1927, we see the first advertisements for this vanity book. This advertisement boasts the very new Raquel vanity books bound in deluxe leather in 3 colors and 3 possible designs tooled in gold. It also says that they're scented with Raquel's most famous perfume, L'Onlay, which could just be a marketing ploy, or it could go to show how successful this perfume was in a very short amount of time. These vanities were being sold for $2.50, which is equivalent to about $45 today. On November 4th, 1927, we can see the first pictures for these compacts in an advertisement. And I actually cannot tell you how thrilling that is, because to see something being advertised as very new almost 100 years ago and be holding that same thing in my hand now, that is a really wild feeling. I'll never get over that. 2 days after this, on November 6, 1927, the Tulsa Tribune advertises the new vanities in 6 colors this time: red, black, brown, blue, green, or gray leather, and this time in a choice of odors instead of only coming in the L'Onlay. You could choose if you wanted Orange Blossom, L'Onlay, or Fragrance of the Night. Wait, yes. On November 9th, 1927, there's another advertisement that only advertises it being scented in Londley, so I think it's most likely that different companies had access to different things and that was what they would sell. This advertisement also says that the rouges come in orange, raspberry, or medium, and we'll do a swatch at the end of this video, but based on other compacts that I have from other brands that have rouges that are labeled as raspberry, I believe that these are probably the raspberry shades that I have. On November 28th, 1927, another advertisement calls these the very newest in compacts, which further leads me to believe that these were only produced and began being sold in 1927, not 1926. This was all a few months to a year before David Zell began filing patents for these, which were all filed between January and November of 1928. On December 8th, 1927, there's another picture of the vanity, and this time you can clearly see the little loops on the puffs that my red compact has. This is the exact same design. It also advertises an unbreakable mirror, leather that will not tarnish or chip, and silver that will not tarnish. I'm defiant. I'm very defiant, and so I kind of snickered at that, and then I had to check myself and remember they weren't talking about these compacts lasting for 100 years. They were talking about the point of time that they would have been used, which would have been a couple years for most people at most, including if you were like gutting them and using them for other things. My first thought when I read unbreakable mirror was that a hammer would say otherwise, but firstly, I would never do that, like not ever, ever. And second, that's not what they're talking about. They're not saying if you run this over with a car, it's going to be fine forever. They're talking about daily use. And the fact is, all of my mirrors are intact. The leather is all still intact, and some of the compacts that I found online are in gorgeous, pristine condition. So they really did last a very long time. Anyway, the next day on December 9th, you can see another picture that shows the little loops on the puffs even clearer. I am skipping over a lot of advertisements because this would be unbelievably repetitive otherwise. I'm really worried that it is already just boring to anybody other than me. But know that there were a lot of ads being run in between all the ones I'm mentioning as well. These were being run nearly every single day. Also promise that there's a reason that I am telling you all of these things and showing you so many articles. It's all relevant, I promise. I'm realizing how nervous I am that this is going to be so like tedious to anybody other than me, essentially. Oh my gosh. Anyway, on December 17th, 1927, you get the first glimpse of the mirror that is inside of the compact, and it matches the fancy, cute little mirrors. I don't know what the official term for them is, which is why I just keep calling them fancy. I know they're not actually fancy, but they're not just a rectangular, which is fancy to me. A rectangular? Anyway, this is why you look at every single ad, or you don't have to look at every single ad. I did it for you. But this is why, like, when you're researching, you look at everything, because one day to the next, something could change that gives you solid information, and that's really important. On December 23rd, an advertisement specifies that these are made of genuine Morocco, which is apparently a type of leather. I don't know anything about that. If you're a leather worker and you'd like to elaborate, feel free to. But then 5 days later on December 28th, there is a name change announcement saying that Raquel has been changed to the Y Perfume Corporation. I have not been able to find any information, not a single advertisement, not anything about the Y Perfume Corporation. So I have no idea how that fits in, nor do I know how that ties in with the Barclay acquisition, which apparently also happened in 1927 that I also found no information about. But apparently, supposedly, there's a lot of changing hands going on, but everything for the next few years was still advertised under the Raquel name. So in early 1928, we continue to see more advertisements for these compacts, often showing the interiors, which continue to have the same mirror and looped puffs. Now, to put it into the timeline, January 27th, 1928 is when David Zell filed a patent for this Raquel vanity case, as well as a second patent that shows the inner mechanism and how the case would work. In the figures for this patent, you can also see the shape of the metal around the mirror being the same as my two compact designs, which I showed you before. These patents were published in 1929 and 1930, respectively. On February 27th, 1928, there's an article about the previously mentioned druggist show, which was called the Northwest Drug Show, and where Raquel was one of 74 exhibitions. Then, on March 1st, 1928, Mr. R.G. Pascoe, the Pacific Coast manager of the company, was published in a really gross article telling women to spend 20 minutes daily fixing their faces. He was the one presenting Raquel at the Northwest Drug Show. And it says, and I quote, "From his booth, Mr. Pankow tells women how to be beautiful and admits that his own wife never knew how to make up her face until he married her and showed her how." He then goes into specific instructions on how to apply makeup, and while there might be some decent information in there, such as wearing too much like cream can clog your pores, I just found this gross. I don't know. Something about being like, oh, yeah, my poor useless wife didn't even know how to do her makeup until I, a man, came along and showed. Shut up. Shut up, R.G. Pascoe. Nobody cares. Oh my God. It just grossed me out. Anyway, on March 14th, 1928 is the first time we see an instance of the rectangular mirror in the Raquel compact. So just previously in February, we were still seeing advertisements showing the old version of the compact, and then in March, we clearly start seeing the rectangular compact with the different style puffs. You can even see the little tiny piece of ribbon that would have pulled these out. Interestingly, this advertisement also features a different design on the cover. Most of the advertisements show the design that I have, but we know that the Raquels came in a bunch of different designs, so it's interesting to see a different one advertised. Now, this leads me to believe that both of the compacts that I have with the fancier little mirrors and the looped puffs came from between 1927 and January or February of 1928. January because that's when the patents started being filed, but it's entirely possible that it took them several months to start putting patent pending on the cases. But since February 17th, I believe? Yes, the 17th. Okay, so since February 17th is the last time we saw that particular compact style advertised, and just less than a month later, we see this new compact style, it leads me to believe that mine were manufactured at latest February of 1928. March of 1928 is also when we start to regularly see stock prices posted in the daily newspapers for Raquel. I do not know anything about the stock market. I have no idea how, I'm not even gonna pretend I know. I tried to do some Googling. I got very confused and gave up. So I don't know anything about that, but I think that continues to show the success of the company that they were posting stocks for them every single day. Also in March of 1928, on the 23rd, there was an article mentioning that Raquel would be the defendant in an upcoming jury case in Johnson versus Raquel Incorporated that was going to be seen on March 26th, just 3 days later. I just found this really interesting. I wasn't able to find any information other than a few times of mentioning them going to court. I wasn't able to find out what the resolution of this was or specifically what the lawsuit was. But with David Zell already getting in legal trouble, this is now the second case of suing to do with this company in some way in a very short span of time. In April of 1928, we continue to see more advertisements for this vanity as well as for Orange Blossom perfume, this time in a new bottle also patented by Graeff Miller. And on the 24th, there's an ad for 10,000 shares of Raquel Incorporated Class A stock, which again, I'm not going to pretend I know what that is. But I mean, I know what stock is. Anyway, it mentions that they trade through about 80 wholesalers, 95% of leading department stores, and that they advertise nationally in magazines and newspapers, which we know is true because we have been seeing them in newspapers all across America by this point, and that growth has been exceptionally rapid. This is a company that was able to become very successful in a very short span of time, which I find to be really interesting. Even if they were going off of the success of the Orange Blossom perfume shop and that kind of folded in as Raquel was created, for them to be able to create more scents and sell all over the place for such high prices and continue to come out with new products and new varieties of their compact, that really shows that this was a very successful company. This article talking about their exceptional growth also specifies that Graeff Miller is the president of the company. Now this is really interesting because we know he patents for them. Now we know that he's the president. I wouldn't be surprised if he did establish the company. I still found no evidence for that, but it's entirely possible that it was him or that it was him and Paul Donald St. John together in a joint venture, since Orange Blossom was already a previously popular perfume that became a Raquel perfume. We continue to see more ads for Raquel through the months, and on June 14th, 1928, an article specifies that Raquel is now offered in Ecrace leather as well as the Morocco. It says that this new leather is $3.50, which is $64.50, and they also have a gold leather version for $5, which is $92. I know people still buy really expensive makeup today, but that is like a lot of money for some rouge and some powder. But anyway, Raquel is now offered in 3 different types of leather at 3 different price points in at least 11 colors, and who even knows how many designs at this point. And this is only 9 months after they first advertised this compact. That I would call that exceptionally rapid growth. I think that's a very astute assessment. On November 6, 1928, David Zell starts another business for leather and metals products, and considering that is what he primarily works with, that makes a lot of sense. Right after this, on November 15th, David Zell patents another one of Raquel's known designs, as well as several others that could have been for Raquel, such as this one with the embossed R right in the center. It's possible that because of the timing, these patents were filed as a part of his new company. David Zell ran several companies that all seemed to do similar things, and it's possible that all of these went into the eventual Zell Fifth Avenue brand. Skipping to February 21st, 1929, an advertisement says that 25 stores have come together to create an unusual price point, putting the compacts on sale for $1.95 instead of the usual $2.50. And in this ad, we can again see the rectangular mirror and the simpler puffs with the ribbons. Over the next few months, they continue to drop in price all across the country. And on April 29th, 1929, which is right after the November patents were filed, they're down to $1.45 from $2.50 and $1.75 from $3.50. It also says they're a discontinued number, and that phrasing is unfamiliar to me, but seeing how they've been on sale continuously for several months, it seems that they may not have been being manufactured anymore, and that they're trying to get rid of the remaining stock that they have. On May 8th, 1929, we can again see the rectangular mirror and the simpler puffs in a Wanamaker's ad. And this ad says they are seen at other smart shops at $2.50. Wanamaker's offer it for $1.50, which I found really funny considering that it had been on sale everywhere across the country for several months now. But people didn't obviously have online access or a way to quickly compare prices, and so it was easy for stores to just make stuff up and seem like they had an exclusive sale that was not exclusive whatsoever. By May 15th, they're down to $1.39, and then a week later on the 21st, they're down to $1.25, which is just half of the original selling price. Sir! Griffin's being noisy at the door, so now he gets, look at his little belly. Look at his little shaved tummy where he had surgery. He will not leave the fucking door alone. Ya baby. Anyway, May 28th, we can see a new picture featuring the square mirror and the little ribbon puffs, which indicates to me that it was between February and March of 1928 that they officially changed designs, because we've seen no new pictures featuring the old design. There have been reruns of some of the same ads that had that picture featured, but nothing new. Now, on June 7th, 1929, there's an advertisement specifically for the single varieties of these book compacts. A lot of the ads I've shown you have mentioned other styles of the compacts that they sell, but they sold other compacts as well. So there was no way of knowing until now that they did sell these with only rouge or powder in them and not as the double compacts. So there's a lot of varieties out there. As another interesting point that actually shows how these were used in people's personal lives, on June 22nd, there's an article about a wedding, and it says that the bride gifted their soloist a Raquel vanity case. All of these advertisements talk about what great gifts these would make, and I talked in my last video about how sometimes these would be given to like hostesses and stuff like that, like all kinds of different ways that people would show their appreciation by giving away a compact. So I, again, find it really, really interesting to find solid examples of this, and also interesting that it made it into a newspaper. Over the next few months, we continue to see these cases on sale everywhere. They are not at a normal price point, literally anywhere. And on October 25th, 1929, they are down to just $1 instead of their original $2.50. And we can again see the square mirror and the simpler puffs in this advertisement. For the remainder of the year, these compacts continued to be reduced in price, and in 1930, the amount of advertisements was almost none. Between 1927 and 1929, there were literally hundreds of ads, often running every single day for these compacts, and in all of 1930, there were only 10 advertisements. At all, period. It's also interesting to note that by 1930, none of the advertisements mention them being perfumed anymore. So either that wasn't a highlight anymore, or they did stop perfuming them sometime between 1928 and 1930. On April 1st, 1930, there is a lawsuit judgment against a carpenter named John B. by David H. Zell Incorporated. But then in June of 1930, David H. Zell Incorporated is sued by a man named G.G. Gregory. And then in November, there's another lawsuit against David H. Zell by the Graeff Miller Company Incorporated. This man was unable to stay out of legal trouble. But going back to June of 1930, the compacts went on sale for just 75 cents, and then there were no advertisements between June and November. The next time they're mentioned is on November 30th, and the price is down to 49 cents, which is about $9.24 in today's money. On December 8th, 1930, the $5 gold vanities are down to just $1.98, which is significantly less than the original sale price of the cheapest vanities that they produced. February 14th to 16th of 1931 are the final advertisements for these compacts that I could find. They were on sale for 79 cents with one last picture of the rectangular mirror. There is no mention anywhere of these vanities existing after February 14th to 16th of 1931. But advertisements for Raquel's Orange Blossom perfume continued until December of 1943. L'Anglais is advertised until 1944, and Allure de la Noche was last advertised in August of 1929. So the company was still running. They were still selling things. I find it very unlikely that they had 20 years of Orange Blossom stocked up to keep selling. And so that it wasn't the end of the company, but it was seemingly the end of these vanities. They were definitely not being sold after 1931, and I find it very, very unlikely that they were being manufactured in 1930 or 1931, considering they had been on very long-running sales. It seems that the last time that they were manufacturing based on sales was likely to be in 1929. There are really only a few other interesting things to note before we completely wrap up here, which is that in 1943, which is the year before David Zell died, the Zell Products Corporation was fined $5,000 in federal court for using 17 13,812 pounds of steel for their compacts and cigarette cases that was in violation of the Second War Powers Act. This is when compact companies and a lot of other companies had to stop using metal because it was all being allotted to building things for the war. Then in 1953, after David had died and his son Daniel took over, there was a strike against Zell Products Corporation, and they fired 4 top officers of the local union, saying that if they were allowed to return to work, another strike may be set off. That's shitty. No matter how you slice it, that is shitty. And then in 1961, which is 30 years post the Raquel vanities, Zell Products Corporation had a fire which set off a sprinkler which somehow caused a tank of liquid gold to overflow into a drain and out into the Atlantic Ocean. This company was a mess. I just find these interesting because Zell was in so much legal trouble while he was alive, and even Raquel had legal trouble, and it really makes me wonder if something to do with this man's shadiness had to do with why these compacts stopped selling so fast when they seemed to be so popular. I do think it would be interesting to do a full deep dive into Zell and the Zell family sometime in the future, so maybe that'll be a little side project later on. But with all this knowledge that we've gathered from all of these articles, as well as the patent information, and knowing that it's most likely the patent pending was stamped on these between 1928 and 1929 when the patent actually was pending, it's my belief that these two were manufactured between 1927 and January or February of 1928 when that patent was filed, and that this one came from either late 1928 or 1929 after the patents were published. It's of course possible that this was made a little bit later, but I find it really hard to believe that they would have continued producing these when everything was on major sale everywhere in the country and not sold for a standard price ever again. That means that these compacts are between 95 and 97 years old, most likely, and even if I'm wrong about some of this stuff, because there's not a date printed on this, I'm never going to be able to say 100% this is exactly right, and I'm not going to pretend I can. This is what I find most likely, and even if I'm incorrect, these would have been produced between 1927, 1926 at the earliest, and 1931, which is a 5-year range for these compacts to have been manufactured. And now we're finally at the end of the video, and it is time to do the rouge swatches. Now, both of the compacts that I have that do still have rouge remaining look to be the same color, and I eventually will be completely cleaning out the compact that only has little tiny remnants in it, because that leftover powder can do damage to the interior, and I want these to last for as long as possible. But the one that still has a bunch of rouge left in it, I am wanting to clean up and then find a way to cover with plastic so that the powder is not coming loose all the time, but so that I can keep those, because I do think it's very interesting to have that available. Not that I'm ever going to use it. Please don't put old makeup on your face. If you would not go to Goodwill and grab a 10-year-old bottle of Great Lash mascara that somebody gave away, do not, for the love of God, please put old vintage makeup on your face. That is so freaking gross. That is so gross. I can't tell you how many people I've seen doing that. Like, legitimately, the amount of people I've seen who find old makeup and they're like, oh, I'm just gonna name it. Ugh! Don't do that. Do not do that. Don't. And if you are really determined to do it, at least get it tested first, because the old makeup was not always made with safe ingredients and it can have fucking heavy metals in it. I shouldn't be cussing. Sorry. Please make safe choices. Putting someone else's old, crusty, dusty makeup on your face is not making a safe choice. That's it. We have reached the end. Thank you so much for following along on this journey and listening to my many ramblings. I really hope that putting all those articles in was justified and that this was interesting for you and you understand why I was so particular about all of that. And I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that you learned something. I hope that this is something that's interesting for you. If you have interest in getting into vintage compacts yourself, I highly encourage it. I think it's a very fun hobby. And yeah, if you have any questions, if you have anything that you would like to know, please let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts. I would love to know if you enjoyed this. And I hope you stick around for the next video. Thank you so much for your time.